Welcome to this edition of In-Depth Alaska. I'm Tracy Sinclair, and I am excited that we have Senator Dan Sullivan with us today. Senator, obviously, normally you spend a lot of time in Washington, but you're in Alaska this weekend. What's going on in Alaska?
Well, Tracy, I'm back. I try to get home most weekends, even when we're in session, and we're in session right now. So just had votes yesterday, and we'll be back Monday. But a lot going on right now in our fishing communities, our different parts of the state, and I would say really big challenges. I like to say right now, kind of best of times, worst of times. Best of times, the Bristol Bay sockeye run is still doing incredible. That's great. That benefits so many parts of our state, not just Bristol Bay. But in other parts of Alaska, let me give you a couple examples. The Yukon, Kuskokwim, the king runs there, the chum runs have essentially collapsed. And, that is just devastating for so many communities in interior Alaska. My wife's family's had a fish camp on the Yukon River for generations. Haven't been able to fish that in many years. So that's one area where people are suffering. And then the other one is our fishing communities throughout the state that support our commercial fishing industry. Kodiak, a lot of our coastal communities. And we are literally seeing kind of what I've described as like a Great Depression. A lot of reasons for that, thousands of jobs at risk. But one of the big reasons is Russia has a gigantic fishing industry. They are flooding the market with their fish. The price of so many species of fish, including salmon species, has collapsed in numbers we haven't seen in decades. And Putin's doing this in part to fund the war machine. This has geopolitical implications, but the devastation that is happening in our fishing communities because of this is very real. So I'm heading to ComFish in Kodiak. That's the annual meeting that brings all Alaskans together to try to listen, of course, but also sound the alarm for others. So I'm really appreciative that you're taking the time to ask me questions about this. We have a lot of ideas, a lot of things that we're working on to help.
Well, that's my question
sure.
is, when you're dealing with what another country is doing, how do we combat that? I mean, how is that something, what can we do to impact that?
Well, it's a great question. So let me give you a couple things that we're working on. First, on that first issue about the Yukon, Kuskokwim Kings, chum, I had a bill that passed last year called the Alaska Salmon Research Task Force Act. That's a mouthful, but the whole purpose of that is to bring the best minds in the state, federal, university, tribal, indigenous, all together to say what is happening with these runs. Why are they cratering? Why is this happening? There's a lot of theories out there. We want to bring the best minds together, figure out where the gaps in research are, and figure out what it is, and then take action. So that task force, which is composed of all Alaskans from all over the state, including the interior and Kuskokwim regions, that's up and running. So that's good news, taking some time. To your question on the bigger international issues, believe it or not, we had this crazy situation that I've been working on literally for years, where Russia was able to import almost as much fish as it wanted to into the U.S. market, and our fishing communities and fishermen couldn't export one fish to Russia over the last 10 years. You want to talk about an unlevel playing field. We had the most unlevel playing field literally in the world. They could flood our markets, take our market share, and we couldn't export one fish to them. I've been working on this for a long time. I have legislation. We finally got that shut down.
Right, I was going to say, I thought that we
did. Now, Russia cannot import fish into the United States at all, including once we put a ban on that, they started sending their fish to China as kind of a loophole, laundering fish, literally. And then China was sending it into the U.S. market, hundreds of millions, crushing our industry. We shut that loophole down in December. So Russia cannot import any fish into America. That is good. What we're trying to do now, and I've been working with the most senior officials, the Secretary of Commerce is going to be speaking tomorrow at ComFish. I pretty much told her, you have to, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, you're in charge of fisheries for America. You got to help my constituents, gosh darn it. And so she's speaking tomorrow. The Deputy Secretary of Treasury has been all over this to help. We are looking to try to extend this ban on Russian seafood to other countries, Canada, Japan, the EU, the UK, to try to get them to ban the importation of Russian seafood. That way you could start to see market prices globally stabilize. And that's going to be a challenge, but we have a lot of reasons to do that. Remember, a lot of his money is going into Putin's war machine in Ukraine. That's a fact.
Right. And I have another question on that. But one
Sure.
question, and I'm not sure that sort of the federal government has an impact on it, but, obviously we see a lot of conflict between commercial fishing
Yeah.
and subsistence fishing.
Absolutely.
Wanting, both to get their share.
Absolutely.
What do you see as the outlook of that? How do we
Well,
continue to work that?
Sure, that's a
resolution?
really important question. Well, look, on this Russian fishing ban, that helps everybody,
Right.
That helps everybody. So there's not a stakeholder group in Alaska that is against what I was trying to do on that. And if we were able to get that ban spread internationally, that would help everybody as well. So there's unanimity on that in Alaska. And as you mentioned, it's hard to get
It's
unanimity.
hard to do that.
It's
for
not
most-
easy to get unanimity on fish issues.
Yeah.
The other area where there is, I think, strong unanimity in Alaska is that bill that I just mentioned, my Alaska Salmon Research Task Force Act, because what that's trying to do is bring everybody together, and it's not easy to bring everybody together. When I initially was proposing this bill, I had a lot of different stakeholder groups say, hey, Dan, what are you doing here? How come, there was nervousness? And I was like, hey, you guys, just trust me. I am trying to get the best minds of our state to figure out what is causing this giant collapse in our iconic runs on the Yukon Kuskokwim that's really hurting people's subsistence. And it's not just food security for our Alaska Native communities, as you know, Tracy. It's the culture. It's the heritage, right? I mean, my daughters have been going to our fish camp since they were born. Literally, we took them when they're 1 year old to learn the ways of their, grandmother and great-grandmother. This is really serious. But to try to bring everybody together and say, okay, what's causing this? Because there's a lot of theories out there, but we need the best scientific minds, the best Native minds, the best state, federal, university to come together, which is happening, and say, here's what we think is happening. And there's another thing. There's a lot of research gaps. The federal government, in my view, is not doing nearly enough research on this issue to help us figure out what the problem is. So that is an area where people are coming together, where there's broad-based agreement. But you're right. There's still a lot of conflict. I'm sure you saw the news on the council meeting this past week, actually, here in Alaska, that had a lot of different views and a lot of different conflict. What we all agree on is to have more abundance. What we all agree on is to have stronger runs. What we all agree on is to make sure Russian, fishing fleets can't flood the global market and crush our coastal communities, which is actually what has been happening. So there's a number of things we can agree on, but you're right, there is internal conflict in Alaska as well.
Yeah, it's been around for years. We do just have a few minutes because I know
Sure.
that you are on your way
Yeah, we gotta get
in
to
moments
Kodiak.
to get to Kodiak. This week has been the Arctic Encounter Symposium. One of the topics has been security in the Arctic,
Yeah.
and I know this is a topic that
Oh, yeah.
you spend a lot of time on.
A lot of
Can you
time.
give us an idea of what threats are to the security in the Arctic?
Well, the threats are very real. I mean, just look at what's been going on in Alaska. 2 summers ago, we had a joint Russian-Chinese naval task force off the coast of Alaska. And that was 7 ships. The U.S. military sent one Coast Guard 150-foot cutter to go intercept this joint Russian-Chinese naval task force. After that, I called our senior military leaders, NORTHCOM, INDOPACOM, and said, hey, gentlemen, no offense, that was pathetic, right? They're going to keep doing this if we send such a weak response to defend our own Arctic and coastal interests here in Alaska. You might remember this past summer, they did it again with a 12-ship joint Russian-Chinese naval task force. 12 ships, that is big, off our coast. To the credit of our military, and I was monitoring this very closely, this time we sent 4 U.S. Navy destroyers and what are called P-8s, which are Navy submarine hunters. Now, that's a robust response, right? But we need to do much, much more. We need to have the ability to have infrastructure that can home port icebreakers, that can home port Navy vessels. The good news is, even though we're late to the ball game on this, we're starting to do it. We're building out a deep water port in Nome. Finally, we've been talking about this for, as you know, decades.
Yeah, I was going to say
but that's
years.
being built, right? I just met with the Corps of Engineers 2 days ago in D.C. And we're going to be in phase 1 of starting to build that. That will be able to handle every kind of a military ship with the exception of a U.S. aircraft carrier and a nuclear sub. Everything else will be able to be home ported and utilize Nome. But secondly, and this is really good news, and again, it took too long, we are finally going to get an icebreaker home ported in Alaska. Now, we're building icebreakers, finally new ones, what we call polar security cutters. Senator Murkowski and I have been pressing the Coast Guard and Navy to get on this. It's taken too long. So we had this idea, pitched it originally in the Trump administration. They liked it. President Biden's team agreed with what Trump was doing, what we were proposing, to buy a commercially available icebreaker. So this year's supplemental, we were able to get that done. There's money right now to buy a commercially available icebreaker, and the Coast Guard did a big study at my request. They took too long. I kind of put some holds on some Coast Guard promotions, saying, "Hey, I need to study, or you're not going to get promoted, right, Admiral?" They said we're going to do this, and we're going to home port it in Juneau. So that's happening. We got a lot more work to do. We got to build out infrastructure in Juneau, work with the community, build out housing. But I met with the Commandant of the Coast Guard just about a month ago. She recommitted to me that icebreaker is going to Juneau, Alaska. Of course, that's great for Juneau and Southeast, but that's great for Alaska. That's great for America to finally have icebreakers in the Arctic. Where else would you put them, right?
The question we did get, and then I'll let you go because I know you do have to run, but as soon as people heard that, they said, why Juneau? Why not someplace closer to where it would likely be needed?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And my strong, I'm the ranking member on the subcommittee in charge of the Coast Guard for the country, right? So I focus on them a lot. And my request to the Coast Guard was, look, you need to get this study done. I had asked for it, and it almost took them 5 years. I was kind of frustrated by this, which is why I put holds on Coast Guard promotions until we got the study. I said, here's what I want in the study. The study needs to say home-ported icebreaker in Alaska, period. That's your conclusion. You guys are the experts on where in Alaska that should be. And, my view was there's plenty of different communities that could have home-ported or been the place for an icebreaker. The Coast Guard are the experts. They look at things in terms of location. They look at things in terms of infrastructure. They look at things like schools and hospitals and medical care. So they look at a giant kind of a number of factors. I know they were looking at Anchorage. I know they were looking at Ketchikan. I know they were looking at Seward. And they came out with this recommendation. I had told them, hey, I'm not going to put my finger on thumb on the scales here. You just pick an Alaskan community that you think works best, and we will get behind it. So that's what's happened. The study, I think, is public on why they chose Juneau. And again, my view is, look, I just wanted Alaska. The Coast Guard figured it out. There's a whole bunch of other communities. But my view on this, Tracy, this should be a series of icebreakers, right? We shouldn't just have one. The ones we're building right now, they're going to be initially, the first 2 are going to be home ported in Seattle. The reason for that is the current icebreakers that we have are home ported in Seattle. But after that, we need a whole fleet of icebreakers. And my view is we should have other communities in Alaska once we're building out those icebreakers and put them here. The good news is this one that we're going to commercially buy, and again, the reason is to fill the gap. We can get that up and retrograded and fit, in the next couple years. and let's get an icebreaker home-ported in our state, and then let's get more too.
Move on. Okay.
Good.
Well, thank you so
Hey,
much,
great to
Senator.
see
And
you,
I
as
know
always.
the senator does have to get to the airport, so we're going to finish here on In Depth Alaska. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great.
Like and subscribe to this podcast.